I've spent 20 years wearing a badge, and I always thought I knew exactly how my story would end. But that night, on a silent stretch of Highway 42, I saw my own wedding ring lying in the gravel, reflecting the strobe of my cruiser's lights. The thing is, I was still wearing my ring. I looked down at my hand, then back at the ground, and that's when the world split open. The flash didn't end Opos. T come from the sky. It came from the driver's side window. And for some reason, I didn't end Opos. T feel the pain. I just felt light. It was a Tuesday, I think. The kind of night where the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. I was patrolling the outskirts of the county, a stretch of road where the streetlights are miles apart. My coffee was cold in the cup holder, bitter, the way I've liked it for 20 years. Everything about that shift was routine, practical. I checked my watch. 2:14 a.m. I remember the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the low crackle of the dispatch radio. It's a sound that usually grounds me. It reminds me that I have a job to do. But that night, there was this shadow in my gut. Not a fear exactly, just a feeling that the clock was ticking differently. I saw a silver sedan pulled over near a cluster of pine trees. No hazards on, just sitting there. I pulled in behind it. My headlights hit the rear glass, but I couldn't and Opos, TC a silhouette. I remember reaching for my flashlight. My hand felt heavy, like I was moving through water. I stepped out of the cruiser. The gravel crunched under my boots. That sound is so clear in my mind, even now. Crunch, crunch. I approached the driver's side. I was doing everything by the book. Hand on my holster, light directed at the side mirror. Then I saw it. On the ground, right next to the driver and Opos' door, a small, glinting object. I leaned in just an inch to see what it was. It was a gold band, a wedding ring. My brain didn't and Opos' make sense of it. I felt my own ring pressing against my finger under my glove. Why was there another one there? In that split second of confusion, the window rolled down. I didn't and Opos' see a face, just the dark hollow of a barrel. And then, the world didn't and Opos' go bang. It went silent. The silence was the loudest thing I've ever heard. There was no heat, no tearing sensation, just a sudden, overwhelming weightlessness, as if someone had cut the strings holding me to the earth. I remember looking down at my chest. I saw the fabric of my uniform, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a coat I had just taken off and thrown on the chair. I tried to draw a breath, but the air didn't go into my lungs. It didn't need to. Everything started to fade at the edges, like an old photograph left out in the sun. The blue and red strobes of my cruiser began to bleed together, turning into a soft, purple haze. I heard a voice. It was my partner, Miller. He was screaming something. I could see his mouth moving, see the panic in his eyes as he ran toward me. But his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. End quote. Brian, stay with me. End quote. I wanted to tell him I was fine. Better than fine, actually. The back pain I'd had for 10 years? Gone. The constant pressure in my temples? Vanished. But then, the darkness started to leak in from the corners of my vision. Not a scary darkness. Not yet. It was like a heavy velvet curtain being drawn closed. I felt myself slipping, sliding away from the gravel, away from the smell of burnt powder, away from the cold night air. And then, I wasn't in Opos' standing on the road anymore. I was looking down. That's the only way I can describe it. I wasn't in Opos' floating, not exactly. I just had no weight, no anchor. Below me, I saw the roof of my cruiser. The light bar was still spinning, red, blue, painting the trees in these jagged, rhythmic pulses. And I saw myself. I looked like a stranger. A man in a dark blue uniform slumped against the gravel. It was strange. As a cop, I've seen bodies before. I've secured scenes. I've filled out the paperwork. But looking at my own shell, there was no ego, no pride. I saw Miller kneeling over me. He was doing chest compressions. I could see the sweat on his forehead, even in the cold. He was crying. I felt this sharp tug in my chest. Not physical pain, but a realization. I thought about my wife, Sarah. I thought about the argument we had that morning. Something stupid. Something about the dishes or the lawn. I wanted to reach down and touch Miller's shoulder. I wanted to tell him to stop, that it was okay, that I could finally see how small all our worries were. But the higher I drifted, the quieter the world became. The sirens faded into a low hum. The lights became pinpricks. And then, The road disappeared. The trees disappeared. I was standing in a place where place didn't and oppose exist. The light didn't come for me. In every story I'd heard, there was a tunnel, a glow, a feeling of warmth. But for me, there was only the void. It was a darkness so thick it felt like it had a weight, like I was standing in the center of an empty universe. And then, I felt it, the regret. It wasn't an oppose, thought. It was a physical presence. Every cold word I'd ever said, every time I'd prioritized the badge over my own family, every moment I'd chosen to be practical instead of being kind, it all came back. I was alone with the version of myself I had spent 50 years hiding. I remember crying out, not with my voice, but with my soul, asking if this was it. If this darkness was the final answer. Then, a voice spoke. It didn't have a sound. It was like a ripple in water. The thing you feared most was not what you expected. I realized then, I wasn't afraid of the bullet. I wasn't even afraid of dying. I was afraid of being forgotten. I was afraid that my life had been nothing but a series of shifts and reports, leaving no light behind. The darkness started to press in, tighter and tighter. I felt like a speck of dust about to be blown away. I whispered a name. Sarah. I wasn't ready to go. Not because I loved life, but because I hadn't finished learning how to love. And just as the darkness was about to swallow me whole, a hand reached out. Not a hand of flesh, a hand of pure, blinding intention. The pullback was violent. It wasn't a gentle drift. It was like being hooked by a freight train and dragged through a narrow pipe. 1 second, I was in that vast, silent void, facing my own soul, and the next, I was slammed back into a world of white light and agonizing noise. The first thing I felt was the cold, not the night air, but the sterile, freezing chill of an emergency room. I heard the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator and the frantic, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt like they were glued shut. When I finally managed to crack them open, I didn't God. I saw a ceiling tile with a small water stain. Practical. Real. I spent 3 weeks in that bed. The doctors called it a miracle. They said my heart had stopped for over 4 minutes. To them, it was a medical anomaly. To me, it was a lifetime. It's been 5 years since that night on Highway 42. I'm not a police officer anymore. I couldn't go back to the badge, not after seeing how fragile the line is between here and there. People ask me if I'm afraid of death now. I tell them no. The darkness taught me that the end and monster. The real monster is living a life full of things you never said. I still have the ring, the gold band I saw on the gravel. I never found out where it came from. The crime scene photos showed nothing there. Maybe it wasn't an ring at all. Maybe it was just a reminder that I had one more chance to get it right. I don't have all the answers. I just know that now, when I look at Sarah, I don't see a routine. I see the light I almost lost.